William Thompson had never imagined his life would change so dramatically on a cold Tuesday morning in November. He was just a regular guy from a small town in England, working as a librarian and living quietly with his elderly grandmother, Rose. At 28 years old, William spent most of his days organizing books, helping visitors, and caring for Rose, who had raised him since his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. That morning started like any other. William made tea for Rose, helped her with her morning medication, and walked to the library through the foggy streets. The town of Millbrook was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and William enjoyed the simple rhythm of his daily routine. He had never been interested in fame or fortune, finding happiness in small things like a good book, Rose's smile, or helping a child find their favorite story. Around 11 o'clock, while William was sorting through returned books, he noticed two men in expensive suits standing near the entrance. They looked completely out of place in the humble town library. One was tall with graying hair, the other shorter with thick glasses. Both carried briefcases and kept looking around nervously. "Excuse me," the taller man said as he approached William's desk. "Are you William Thompson, born on March 15, 1995? William looked up from his work, confused. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you with something? Are you looking for a particular book?" The two men exchanged glances before the shorter one stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Charles Whitmore, and this is my colleague, Dr. James Harrison. We're from the Royal Heritage Department. We need to speak with you privately about a very important matter." William's heart began to beat faster. The Royal Heritage Department? He had never heard of such a thing, and he certainly couldn't imagine why they would want to talk to him. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. I'm just a librarian. I don't have anything to do with royal heritage or anything like that." Mr. Whitmore smiled gently. "I understand your confusion, Mr. Thompson, but there's no mistake. We've been searching for you for many years. Could we perhaps sit down somewhere private? What we have to tell you will come as quite a shock." The library had a small meeting room that was rarely used except for the monthly book club meetings. William led the two men there, his mind racing with questions. As they sat down around the old wooden table, Dr. Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out several thick folders filled with documents. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Harrison began, "what we're about to tell you may seem impossible to believe, but every word is true and verified by years of research. You are the rightful heir to the throne of a small European kingdom called Valdoria." William stared at them for a long moment before laughing. "I'm sorry, but that's absolutely ridiculous. My grandmother Rose raised me here in Millbrook. My parents were ordinary people who worked in the local factory. There's no way I could be connected to any kingdom." Mr. Whitmore opened one of the folders and spread several documents on the table. "Your father, who you knew as David Thompson, was actually Prince David of Valdoria. He fled the kingdom 30 years ago during a political crisis and changed his identity to protect himself and his future family." William's laughter died in his throat. "That's impossible. My father worked in a textile factory. He wasn't a prince. The factory job was his cover," Dr. Harrison explained patiently. "Your father was very young when he had to leave Valdoria. The kingdom was in turmoil, and his life was in danger from those who wanted to overthrow the royal family. He came to England, created a new identity, and tried to live a normal life." Dr. Harrison pulled out a faded photograph and handed it to William. The picture showed a young man in royal dress uniform, standing next to an older man wearing a crown. William's hands trembled as he looked at the photo. The young man looked exactly like his father, but dressed in clothes William had never seen before. "This is your father at age 21, standing with King Frederick, your grandfather, at the last royal ceremony before the crisis began," Dr. Harrison continued. "Your father never told you about his past because he wanted to protect you. He hoped you could live a peaceful life away from the dangers of royal politics." William set the photograph down with shaking hands. "Even if this is true, which I'm not saying it is, why are you telling me now? And what does this have to do with coronations and bringing the world to tears?" Mr. Whitmore leaned forward seriously. "Because, Mr. Thompson, the situation in Valdoria has changed dramatically. The people who forced your father to flee are gone. The kingdom has been without a proper ruler for 30 years, and the country is struggling. The people of Valdoria have been searching for their rightful king, and our research has led us to you." "But I don't know anything about being a king," William protested. "I work in a library. I take care of my grandmother. I've never even left England." "We understand this is overwhelming," Dr. Harrison said kindly. "But the people of Valdoria need you. The kingdom is small but beautiful, with about 200,000 citizens. They've been governing themselves as best they can, but they need their rightful king to lead them into the future. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the familiar streets of Millbrook. Everything he had ever known seemed to be crumbling around him. What about Rose? I can't just leave her here alone. She's 87 years old and needs constant care. Your grandmother would be welcome to come with you to Valdoria, Mr. Whitmore assured him. In fact, we've spoken with her this morning. She's the one who confirmed many of the details about your father's past. She's known the truth all along. William spun around, shocked. Rose knew? She knew my father was a prince and never told me. She was protecting you, just as your father asked her to, Dr. Harrison explained. She promised your father on his deathbed that she would keep the secret until it was safe for you to know the truth. She believes that time has come. The meeting room fell silent as William tried to process everything he had heard. His entire life, everything he thought he knew about himself and his family, had just been turned upside down. He thought about his quiet days in the library, his simple routines, his plans to continue caring for Rose until she was no longer with him. I need time to think about this, William finally said. I can't make such a huge decision right now. Of course, Mr. Whitmore said, standing up. We understand this is life-changing news. But I must tell you that the situation in Valdoria is becoming urgent. The country needs stability, and the people are hoping for their king's return. We can give you a few days to consider, but not much longer. Dr. Harrison gathered the documents, but left the photograph of William's father on the table. Take this with you. Look at it, and think about your father's sacrifice. He gave up his throne and his kingdom to protect his family. Now you have the chance to honor his memory by reclaiming what he had to leave behind. After the two men left, William sat alone in the meeting room for nearly an hour, staring at the photograph. The resemblance between himself and the young prince was undeniable. He could see his own eyes, his own nose, even his own way of standing in the formal pose. When he finally returned to work, William could barely concentrate on his tasks. Every book he shelved, every question he answered felt surreal, as if he was moving through a dream. The other library workers noticed his distraction, but attributed it to a personal problem and gave him space. That evening, William walked home slowly, dreading the conversation he knew he had to have with Rose. She was waiting for him in her favorite chair by the fireplace, her knitting in her lap, but her eyes were alert and knowing. They came to see you today, didn't they? She asked quietly before William could say anything. William sat down across from her, still holding the photograph. Rose, why didn't you tell me? All these years, why did you keep this secret? Rose set down her knitting and looked at her grandson with eyes full of love and sadness. Because your father made me promise to protect you from this burden for as long as possible. He wanted you to have a chance at a normal, peaceful life before you had to face the responsibilities of being a king. But I'm not prepared for this, Rose. I don't know how to be a king. I barely know how to manage my own life, let alone an entire country. Rose smiled gently. Your father felt exactly the same way when he was your age. Being a good king isn't about being born knowing everything. It's about caring for people, listening to their needs, and trying to do what's right. You've been doing that your whole life, William, right here in Millbrook. William thought about all the times he had helped elderly visitors at the library find books they needed, or stayed late to help students with their research, or organized reading programs for children. Perhaps Rose was right that he already had some of the skills needed for leadership, but ruling a country seemed impossibly different from helping people in a small-town library. What if I fail? What if I'm terrible at being a king and make everything worse for the people of Valdoria? William asked. Then, you'll learn from your mistakes and try to do better, just like every good leader does, Rose replied. But, William, you have something special that many rulers lack. You genuinely care about other people's happiness and well-being. That's the most important quality a king can have. They talked late into the night, with Rose sharing stories about William's father that she had kept secret for years. She told him about David's struggles with leaving his homeland, his fears about being discovered, and his deep love for his family that made the sacrifice worthwhile. As William finally went to bed that night, his mind was spinning with images of royal palaces, crown ceremonies, and the faces of 200,000 people he had never met but who were apparently counting on him to lead them. The comfortable simplicity of his life in Millbrook suddenly felt both precious and fragile, like something that could disappear at any moment. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine himself wearing a crown, making important decisions that would affect thousands of lives, and living up to the legacy of a father he was only now beginning to understand. The weight of royal destiny pressed down on him like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. Tomorrow, he would have to give Mr. Whitmore and Dr. Harrison an answer that would change not only his own life, but the lives of everyone in Valdoria. The quiet librarian from Millbrook was being asked to become a king, and the whole world would be watching to see if he was brave enough to accept the crown that had been waiting for him his entire life. The next morning brought no relief from the overwhelming thoughts that had kept William awake most of the night. He sat at his small kitchen table, mechanically stirring his tea while Rose watched him with concern. The photograph of his father in royal dress lay between them, a constant reminder of the impossible decision he faced. "I keep thinking this must be some kind of elaborate joke or mistake," William said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since breakfast began. Rose reached across the table and covered his hand with her wrinkled but warm fingers. "I know it's difficult to believe, dear. When your father first told me who he really was, I thought he was suffering from some kind of delusion. But then he showed me documents, photographs, and told me stories about Valdoria that no one could have invented." William looked up at his grandmother, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. "How did you handle keeping such a huge secret for so long? Didn't it feel like lying to me every day?" "It felt like protecting someone I love," Rose replied simply. "Your father was terrified that if the wrong people discovered where he was, they would come for him, and potentially hurt you and your mother too. The secret wasn't just about hiding his past, it was about keeping all of you safe." Before William could respond, there was a soft knock at the front door. Through the window, he could see Mr. Whitmore and Dr. Harrison waiting patiently on the doorstep. William's stomach dropped, knowing they had come for his decision. "I'm not ready," he whispered to Rose. "Sometimes the most important decisions in life must be made before we feel ready for them," she replied gently. "But whatever you choose, I'll support you completely." William opened the door and invited the two men inside. They accepted Rose's offer of tea and sat in the small living room, their formal suits looking even more out of place among Rose's comfortable furniture and family photographs. "Mr. Thompson," Mr. Whitmore began, "I hope you've had time to consider our conversation yesterday. I know this is an enormous decision, but I must emphasize again how urgently Valdoria needs its rightful king." Dr. Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet computer. "Perhaps it would help if you could see Valdoria for yourself. We've brought some recent footage of the kingdom and its people." The tablet screen showed stunning views of a small mountainous country with crystal-clear lakes, medieval castles, and charming villages dotted with red-roofed houses. The scenery was breathtaking, like something from a fairy tale book. But what struck William most were the people in the videos. Families going about their daily lives, children playing in village squares, elderly couples sitting on park benches. Valdoria has managed to maintain its independence and culture despite being surrounded by larger countries, Dr. Harrison explained as the footage continued. "The people are proud and hardworking, but they've struggled without proper leadership. Economic development has stagnated, and there are growing pressures from neighboring countries who would like to absorb Valdoria into their territories." The next video showed a large crowd gathered in what appeared to be the capital city's main square. Many people were holding signs with words William couldn't read, but their faces showed a mixture of hope and determination. "This was filmed just last week," Mr. Whitmore said. "The people are rallying in support of their rightful king's return. Word has spread that we've found you, and there's tremendous excitement throughout the kingdom." William watched the faces in the crowd, trying to imagine that these strangers were depending on him for leadership and guidance. "But I don't speak their language. I don't know their customs or their laws. How could I possibly govern people whose culture I don't understand?" Valdoria was actually established by English settlers centuries ago, Dr. Harrison explained. English is still the official language, though many people also speak Valdorian, which is similar to German. The legal system is based on English common law, and the cultural traditions have many similarities to what you'd find in rural England. Rose had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. "William, your father used to tell me stories about Valdoria when he was feeling homesick. He described it as being like the best parts of the English countryside, but with mountains and lakes that took your breath away. He said the people were kind and honest, always willing to help their neighbors." Mr. Whitmore leaned forward earnestly. "Mr. Thompson, I want to be completely honest with you about what accepting the crown would mean. It wouldn't be easy. There would be tremendous pressure, difficult decisions to make, and constant public scrutiny. But you would also have the opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of 200,000 people who desperately need strong, caring leadership. What would happen if I say no? William asked quietly. Dr. Harrison and Mr. Whitmore exchanged glances before Dr. Harrison answered. The kingdom would continue to struggle. Eventually, it might be absorbed by one of its larger neighbors, and the unique culture and independence of Valdoria could be lost forever. The people would lose not just their kingdom, but their identity as a nation. The weight of that responsibility settled on William's shoulders like a heavy cloak. He thought about all the books he had read about history, about civilizations that had disappeared because they lacked strong leadership at crucial moments. Could he really walk away knowing that his decision might determine whether an entire culture survived? If I were to accept, William said slowly, what would the process look like? I assume I couldn't just show up and announce that I'm the king. Mr. Whitmore smiled for the first time since they had met. There would be a formal process of verification and acceptance. First, you would need to travel to Valdoria to meet with the Council of Elders, who serve as the temporary governing body. They would formally recognize you as the rightful heir and invite you to accept the crown. Then, there would be a period of preparation and education, Dr. Harrison continued. You would work with advisors to learn about the kingdom's current situation, its laws, and its challenges. This would take several months, giving you time to grow into the role gradually. And, finally, there would be a coronation ceremony, Mr. Whitmore added. It would be a celebration not just for Valdoria, but watched by people around the world. It's been 30 years since Valdoria had a proper king, and your coronation would represent hope and renewal for the kingdom. William closed his eyes, trying to imagine himself in a crown and royal robes, taking vows to protect and serve a country he had never seen. The image seemed completely surreal, but underneath the fear, he felt a small stirring of something that might have been excitement. Could Rose come with me right away, or would she need to wait until I was settled? He asked. She could accompany you immediately if she wished, Mr. Whitmore assured him. In fact, the people of Valdoria would be honored to welcome the woman who raised their king. Rose squeezed William's hand. I'm 87 years old, dear. I've lived my whole life in this little town, but I think I'd like to see a palace before I die. And, more importantly, I want to see you fulfill your destiny. William looked around the small living room where he had spent so many peaceful evenings reading by the fireplace, helping Rose with her puzzles, or simply enjoying quiet conversation. Leaving this behind felt like giving up everything familiar and safe. But staying meant turning his back on people who needed him, and on the legacy his father had unknowingly left for him. What about my job at the library? He asked, grasping at practical concerns. I can't just disappear without notice. Dr. Harrison smiled. We've already spoken with the head librarian, Mrs. Peterson. She's been sworn to secrecy, but she understands the situation and is prepared to handle your departure. She says the library will always be proud to say that a king once worked there. The last of William's immediate objections crumbled away, leaving him face to face with the enormous decision itself. He thought about his father, who had given up a throne to protect his family. Now William was being asked to reclaim that throne to protect an entire nation of people. I need a few minutes to think, William said finally. Could you give Rose and me some time alone? The two men nodded and stepped outside to wait in their car. William and Rose sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. What do you think Dad would want me to do? William asked eventually. Rose considered the question carefully before answering. I think he would be proud that you're even considering it. Your father was a good man who cared deeply about duty and helping others. He gave up his crown because it was the right thing to do at the time to protect his family. Now, accepting that crown might be the right thing to do to protect his people. William nodded slowly. I'm terrified, Rose. What if I make terrible mistakes? What if the people don't like me? What if I'm nothing like the king they need? Then, you'll learn and grow and become better, Rose replied. The fact that you're worried about doing well tells me you'll work hard to be a good king. The worst rulers in history were the ones who thought they already knew everything. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the familiar street where he had grown up. In a few hours, this view might become a memory rather than his daily reality. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. If I do this, everything changes forever, he said quietly. Everything changes anyway, dear, Rose replied. The only choice we really have is whether we change by accident or by intention. William took a deep breath and felt something shift inside him. Perhaps it was courage, or perhaps it was simply acceptance of what he had always been meant to become. He walked to the front door and opened it, gesturing for Mr. Whitmore and Dr. Harrison to return. "I'll do it," he said simply as they entered. "I'll accept the crown and become king of Valdoria." The two men smiled broadly, and Dr. Harrison immediately began making phone calls to arrange travel and accommodations. Mr. Whitmore shook William's hand warmly. "You're making the right choice, Your Majesty," he said, and William realized that his life as a private citizen had just ended forever. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Phone calls were made, documents were signed, and arrangements were made for Rose's care during the journey. William packed a single suitcase, unsure what clothes would be appropriate for a future king, but certain that new wardrobe would be provided. As evening approached, William and Rose sat together for what might be their last quiet meal in the small kitchen where they had shared so many conversations over the years. "Are you ready for this adventure, Rose?" William asked, still hardly believing that by tomorrow they would be on their way to a kingdom he had never imagined existed. Rose smiled and patted his hand. "At my age, every day is an adventure. But, I have to admit, becoming the grandmother of a king wasn't something I had planned for my final years." That night, William lay in his childhood bedroom for the last time, staring at the ceiling and trying to prepare himself mentally for the journey ahead. Tomorrow, he would leave everything familiar behind and step into a role that would define the rest of his life. The quiet librarian from Millbrook was about to become King William of Valdoria, and the whole world would be watching to see what kind of leader he would become. The journey to Valdoria began at dawn, with a black sedan picking up William and Rose from their home in Millbrook. As they drove through the familiar streets one last time, William pressed his face to the window, memorizing every shop, every corner, every tree that had been part of his world for 28 years. Rose held his hand tightly, understanding that this moment marked the end of one life and the beginning of something entirely different. At London's Heathrow Airport, they were escorted through private channels away from the crowds and media. Mr. Whitmore had warned them that news of the lost prince's discovery was beginning to leak to international press, and they needed to reach Valdoria before the story became public worldwide. The private jet was unlike anything William had ever experienced. Leather seats that reclined into beds, a dining area with crystal glasses, and windows that offered stunning views of the European countryside as they flew southeast toward the small kingdom nestled in the mountains between Austria and Switzerland. "I keep expecting to wake up and find this is all a dream," William confided to Rose as they flew over the Alps. The mountains below looked like something from a postcard, their snow-covered peaks glinting in the afternoon sunlight. "If it is a dream, at least it's a beautiful one," Rose replied, looking out the window with wonder. "I never thought I'd see the world from this high up." Dr. Harrison had been using the flight time to brief William on the basics of Valdorian history and government. The kingdom had been founded in the 1400s by English merchants who discovered a fertile valley surrounded by protective mountains. Over the centuries, it had maintained its independence through careful diplomacy and the natural fortress of its geography. "Your family line goes back 12 generations, Dr. Harrison explained, showing William a family tree that traced his ancestry back to the original King Edmund I. Each king has left their mark on the kingdom, but your father was particularly beloved for his focus on education and environmental protection." "What exactly caused the crisis that forced my father to leave?" William asked, trying to understand the political situation he would be inheriting. "A group of wealthy merchants and foreign investors tried to overthrow the monarchy and turn Valdoria into a commercial territory," Mr. Whitmore explained. "They wanted to strip mine the mountains and turn the beautiful valleys into industrial zones. Your father opposed them, and they threatened to kill him and destroy the royal family completely." William felt a chill at the thought of how different his life could have been. What happened to these people? Are they still a threat? "The leader died 10 years ago, and his followers have either left the country or accepted that the monarchy is the rightful government," Dr. Harrison assured him. "The current situation is actually quite positive. The people have managed to preserve their culture and environment, and they're eager for proper leadership to help them move forward." As they began their descent toward Valdoria, William got his first real look at the kingdom he was about to rule. The capital city of Sancta Maria nestled in a valley beside a crystal blue lake, with medieval architecture mixing beautifully with more modern buildings. The surrounding mountains were covered with forests and dotted with small villages connected by winding roads. It's beautiful, William breathed, hardly believing that this fairy tale landscape was about to become his home. Wait until you see it up close, Mr. Whitmore said with a smile. Valdoria has been called one of the most beautiful places on Earth. The plane landed at a small airport where a crowd of people had gathered despite the attempt to keep William's arrival secret. As he stepped off the plane, William heard cheering and saw people waving small Valdorian flags, red and gold banners with a mountain peak and crown symbol. Your Majesty, a woman in an elegant blue dress approached with a warm smile. I am Elena Moravec, President of the Council of Elders. On behalf of all Valdoria, welcome home. William shook her hand, still not quite used to being called Your Majesty, but feeling something stir in his chest at the word home. These people considered him to belong here, even though he had never seen this place before in his life. The drive from the airport to the royal palace took them through the heart of Sancta Maria. People lined the streets, many holding signs written in English. Welcome King William, our prince has returned, and long live the king. Children threw flower petals at the car, and elderly people waved from their windows. They've been waiting for this day for 30 years, Elena explained as they drove. Many of these people were children when your father had to leave. They've grown up hearing stories about their lost prince, and dreaming of the day he would return. Rose squeezed William's hand as they watched the celebration outside their car windows. Look how happy they are, dear. They're not just welcoming a king, they're welcoming hope. The royal palace was a magnificent structure that looked like it had been lifted from a storybook. Built of cream-colored stone with red tile roofs and surrounded by gardens that were still blooming despite the late season, it sat on a hill overlooking the lake and the city below. This has been your family's home for over 500 years, Elena said as they approached the main entrance. Every king of Valdoria has walked through these doors. Inside, the palace was both grand and surprisingly warm. High ceilings with painted frescoes, tapestries depicting Valdorian history, and furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. Servants lined the main hallway, bowing as William passed, but their faces showed genuine smiles rather than mere formality. These are the people who maintain the palace while waiting for your return, Elena explained. Many of their families have served the royal household for generations. William's private chambers were in the east wing of the palace, with windows that offered breathtaking views of the lake and mountains. Rose was given rooms nearby, and she immediately fell in love with the sitting room that overlooked the palace gardens. I could get used to this, she admitted with a chuckle as she settled into a chair by the window. Though I do hope they have good tea. That evening, William had his first formal meeting with the Council of Elders, who served as Valdoria's temporary government. The council chamber was a circular room with a round table where 12 people sat representing different regions and interests within the kingdom. Your Majesty, Elena began formally, we are here to officially recognize you as the rightful heir to the throne of Valdoria, and to invite you to accept the crown of your ancestors. Each council member stood in turn to express their support and to briefly describe the challenges facing their particular area of responsibility. William listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions about everything from agricultural policies to education funding to environmental protection. I want to be completely honest with all of you, William said when they had finished their presentations. 3 days ago, I was a librarian in a small English town. I know nothing about governing a country, and I'm terrified of making mistakes that could hurt the people of Valdoria. The council members exchanged glances, and an elderly man named Klaus Weber spoke up. Your Majesty, if I may, that fear tells us that you will be a good king. The worst leaders are those who think they know everything already. A wise king listens, learns, and asks for help when he needs it. Another council member, a middle-aged woman named Maria Santos, nodded in agreement. We don't expect you to solve every problem immediately. What we need is someone who cares about the people and is willing to work hard to understand our needs. Over the following weeks, William threw himself into learning everything he could about Valdoria. He spent mornings with various advisors studying the kingdom's laws, economics, and international relationships. Afternoons were devoted to meeting with citizens from different walks of life: farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, students, and elderly residents who remembered his father's reign. What struck William most was how much the people genuinely cared about their country and each other. In the villages, neighbors helped each other with harvesting and home repairs. In the city, local businesses supported community events and charities. Everyone seemed to take personal responsibility for maintaining the beauty and culture of their homeland. The people here really do feel like a big family, William told Rose one evening as they sat in her favorite spot overlooking the gardens. I'm starting to understand why my father was so heartbroken to leave this place. And now you're giving them back something they've been missing for 30 years, Rose replied. Not just a king, but hope for the future. The date for William's coronation was set for December 23rd, giving him 2 months to prepare and allowing time for international dignitaries to make arrangements to attend. Word of the ceremony had spread around the world, and media outlets were calling it the most romantic royal story of the century. As the weeks passed, William found himself becoming more confident in his new role. He established a daily routine of morning meetings with advisors, afternoon visits with citizens, and evening study sessions learning about royal protocols and international diplomacy. His natural compassion and genuine interest in people's welfare made him popular with everyone he met. One particularly memorable day, William visited a rural village where flooding had damaged several homes. Instead of just making an official inspection, he rolled up his sleeves and helped villagers carry furniture and belongings to safety. Pictures of the future king working alongside his people spread around the world, earning him admiration far beyond Valdoria's borders. You're becoming the king Valdoria needs, Elena told him that evening. Not just a figurehead, but a leader who truly cares about his people's welfare. But it was Rose who helped William understand the deeper significance of what was happening. Your father gave up his crown to protect his family, she said one evening. Now you're accepting that crown to protect your people. Both choices required tremendous courage and love. As the coronation approached, William felt a growing sense of excitement mixed with nervousness. He was no longer the confused librarian who had been shocked by news of his royal heritage. He was becoming King William of Valdoria, and he was starting to believe that he might actually be able to do justice to the role. The transformation was remarkable to everyone who knew him. The quiet, reserved young man from Millbrook was developing into a confident leader who listened carefully, spoke thoughtfully, and acted with compassion. His genuine care for people's welfare and his willingness to learn from mistakes earned him respect and affection throughout the kingdom. The night before his coronation, William stood on his balcony looking out over the city lights reflected in the lake below. Tomorrow, he would wear his father's crown and take vows that would bind him to serve these people for the rest of his life. The scared librarian was ready to become a king, and the kingdom was ready to celebrate the return of their royal family. What no one could predict was how deeply the coronation ceremony would touch people not just in Valdoria, but around the entire world. The simple sincerity of a reluctant king accepting responsibility for others would create a moment of pure emotion that would indeed bring tears to millions of eyes. The morning of December 23rd dawned clear and crisp, with fresh snow covering the mountains surrounding Valdoria like a wedding veil. William woke before sunrise, unable to sleep through the mixture of excitement and nervousness that had been building for days. Today, he would officially become King William I of Valdoria, and the ceremony would be broadcast to over 50 countries around the world. Rose was already awake when he knocked softly on her door, sitting by her window with a cup of tea and watching the early morning preparations in the palace courtyard below. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked as William joined her at the window. "Like I'm about to jump off a cliff and hope I remember how to fly," William replied with a nervous laugh. "What if I forget my vows? What if I trip walking up to the throne? What if people watch this and decide they made a mistake choosing me as king?" Rose set down her teacup and took his hands in hers. "William, for the past 2 months I've watched you learn everything you could about this country and its people. I've seen you help flood victims, comfort worried farmers, and listen patiently to every concern brought to you. If people could see what I see, they would know Valdoria is getting exactly the king it needs." Outside their window, workers were setting up chairs and decorations in the palace courtyard where the public portion of the ceremony would take place. Florists were arranging thousands of flowers, and technicians were testing camera equipment that would broadcast the coronation around the world. The formal ceremony would actually take place in 2 parts. The first, more private portion would be held in the palace's ancient coronation chamber, where kings of Valdoria had been crowned for centuries. Only the Council of Elders, a few international dignitaries, and close family would attend this sacred moment. The second part would be a public celebration in the courtyard, where William would appear before his people as their officially crowned king. At 9 o'clock, royal attendants arrived to help William prepare for the ceremony. The coronation robes had been worn by every king in his family line, carefully preserved and maintained over the centuries. The deep blue velvet was embroidered with gold thread depicting the mountains and lakes of Valdoria, and the ceremonial cloak was lined with ermine and fastened with a golden clasp that had belonged to the first king of Valdoria. As the attendants helped him dress, William caught sight of himself in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the person looking back. The formal robes transformed him from the simple librarian he had been just months before into someone who actually looked like he belonged on a throne. "Your father would be so proud," Elena said as she entered to escort him to the coronation chamber. "You look every inch a king, Your Majesty." The coronation chamber was a small, circular room at the heart of the palace that had been used for royal ceremonies for over 500 years. Ancient tapestries covered the stone walls, and candles provided soft, flickering light that made the gold decorations gleam. The throne itself was carved from a single piece of oak that legend said had been blessed by the kingdom's patron saint. Representatives from 12 countries had traveled to witness the coronation, including ambassadors from England, Austria, Switzerland, and even the United States. The Archbishop of Valdoria, an elderly man named Father Benedict who had known William's father personally, would conduct the ceremony using words that had been spoken at every royal coronation for centuries. As William entered the chamber, everyone rose to their feet. He walked slowly down the short aisle toward the throne, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. Rose sat in the front row, tears already streaming down her face as she watched her grandson take the final steps toward his destiny. Father Benedict began the ceremony with a prayer in the ancient Valdorian language, then switched to English for the formal vows. "William David Thompson," he said solemnly, "do you solemnly promise and swear to govern the people of the Kingdom of Valdoria according to their respective laws and customs?" "I solemnly promise so to do," William replied, his voice stronger and clearer than he had expected. "Will you to your power cause law and justice and mercy to be executed in all your judgments?" "I will." "Will you to the utmost of your power maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel?" "Will you to the utmost of your power maintain and preserve inviolably the settlement of the Kingdom of Valdoria and the doctrine, worship, discipline, and government thereof, as by law established?" "All this I promise to do." Father Benedict lifted the crown from its velvet cushion. It was an ancient piece, not as elaborate as some royal crowns, but beautiful in its simplicity. Made of gold with sapphires representing the blue lakes of Valdoria and diamonds representing the snow-covered mountain peaks, it had been worn by 11 kings before William. "And therefore I, Father Benedict, Archbishop of Valdoria, will crown you king of this realm. And may God Almighty, whose kingdom is everlasting, establish your throne in righteousness, that it may stand fast forevermore." As the crown was placed on William's head, he felt the weight of centuries of tradition and responsibility settling on his shoulders. But instead of feeling crushed by that weight, he felt strengthened by it. He was now connected to every king who had come before him, and to every person in Valdoria who would depend on his leadership. The small group of witnesses in the chamber began to applaud, but it was Rose's proud smile that William focused on as he stood up from the throne for the first time as the officially crowned king of Valdoria. She dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, and William could see in her face both joy for his achievement and sadness that his parents weren't there to witness this moment. But the most emotional part of the ceremony was yet to come. As King William emerged from the palace to greet his people for the first time, the crowd in the courtyard fell completely silent. Over 3,000 Valdorians had gathered to see their new king, and thousands more lined the streets outside the palace gates. William walked slowly to the elevated platform where he would address his people for the first time as their king. As he approached the microphone, he could see faces in the crowd that had become familiar over the past 2 months. The farmer who had taught him about crop rotation, the teacher who had explained the Valdorian education system, the shopkeeper who had shared stories about life during his father's reign. For a moment, William was overwhelmed by the sight of so many people looking at him with hope and expectation. He thought about the tremendous trust they were placing in him, and about how much they deserved a king who would serve them well. "My dear people of Valdoria," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. 2 months ago, I didn't know this beautiful kingdom existed. I was a librarian in a small English town, living a quiet life with my grandmother Rose, who who is here with me today." He gestured toward Rose, who was seated on the platform nearby, and the crowd turned to applaud the elderly woman who had raised their king. "I never dreamed that I would one day stand before you as your king, and I want you to know that I do not take this responsibility lightly. You have welcomed a stranger into your hearts and trusted him with your future, and I promise you that I will spend every day of my reign working to prove worthy of that trust." William paused, looking out over the sea of faces before him. In the crowd, he could see children sitting on their parents' shoulders to get a better view, elderly people who had waited 30 years for this moment, and young adults who had never known what it was like to have a king. "My father had to leave this kingdom to protect his family, and I know it broke his heart to abandon the people he loved. But his sacrifice made it possible for me to stand here today, and I want to honor his memory by being the king he would have wanted me to become." William's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I promise to listen to your concerns and to work with you to solve the challenges facing our kingdom. I promise to protect our beautiful environment and our unique culture. I promise to ensure that every child in Valdoria has access to good education and healthcare, and that every family has the opportunity to prosper. But most importantly, I promise to remember that being your king is not about power or privilege. It is about service. I am here to serve you, to work for your welfare, and to help build a future that will make all of us proud." As William spoke these final words, something unexpected happened. He had been so focused on delivering his speech clearly that he hadn't noticed the tears streaming down his own face. The emotion of the moment, the weight of responsibility, the love he had already developed for these people, the pride he felt in carrying on his father's legacy, overwhelmed him completely. The sight of their new king moved to tears by his commitment to serve them touched something deep in the hearts of everyone watching. The crowd began to weep as well, not from sadness but from joy and hope, and the recognition that they were witnessing something truly special. Television cameras captured every moment, broadcasting William's emotional speech and the crowd's reaction around the world. In homes and offices across dozens of countries, people stopped what they were doing to watch this extraordinary moment. Social media exploded with comments about the crying king, whose genuine emotion had moved millions of viewers. "I have never seen anything so beautiful," one viewer posted online. "This is what a real leader looks like, someone who cares so much about his people that he cries when promising to serve them." The ceremony concluded with the singing of Valdoria's national anthem, followed by the release of thousands of white doves that circled the palace before flying off toward the mountains. As the crowd began to disperse, many people lingered, reluctant to end this perfect moment. That evening, there was a formal state dinner attended by international dignitaries and Valdorian officials. Kings and presidents from other countries offered their congratulations and their hopes for strong diplomatic relationships with the newly restored Kingdom of Valdoria. But the most meaningful moment of the entire day came late that night, when William and Rose sat quietly in his chambers, finally, alone after the crowds and cameras had departed. "Did I do all right today?" William asked, still feeling emotionally drained from the intensity of the ceremony. Rose smiled and reached over to touch the crown, which sat on a nearby table waiting to be returned to the royal vault for safekeeping. "You were magnificent, dear. But more than that, you were real. People could see that you genuinely care about them, and that's what made today so special." "I can't believe how emotional I became during the speech," William admitted. "I was trying so hard to be dignified and royal, and then I just started crying in front of the whole world." "That's exactly why people loved it," Rose replied. "They didn't want to see a distant, perfect monarch. They wanted to see someone who understood the importance of what was happening and who felt honored to serve them. Your tears showed them that their trust wasn't being given to someone who would take it for granted." As William finally prepared for bed on his first night as king, he reflected on how completely his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been worried about overdue library books and Rose's doctor appointments. Now he was responsible for the welfare of an entire nation, and somehow, despite his fears, it felt right. Looking out his window at the city lights reflected in the lake below, King William knew that the real work was just beginning. There would be difficult decisions to make, problems to solve, and challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But he also knew that he was ready to face whatever came next, supported by the love of his people and the wisdom of the advisors who would help guide him through his reign. The coronation had indeed brought the world to tears, but they were tears of joy, hope, and recognition that sometimes the most unexpected people prove to be exactly what the world needs. 6 months after his coronation, King William stood on the same balcony where he had nervously awaited his first day as ruler, but now he looked out over his kingdom with confidence and deep satisfaction. The transformation was remarkable, not just in William himself, but in the entire kingdom of Valdoria. The emotional coronation had indeed brought the world to tears, but, more importantly, it had brought attention and support to Valdoria that exceeded everyone's expectations. The image of the crying king who was moved to tears by his commitment to serve had touched hearts globally, and the results were extraordinary. Within weeks of the coronation, tourism inquiries had increased by over 400%. People from around the world wanted to visit the fairy tale kingdom with the compassionate king. But William was careful to manage this interest thoughtfully, ensuring that tourism would benefit Valdorians without overwhelming their peaceful way of life. The key is sustainable growth, William explained to his economic advisors during one of their weekly meetings. We want to share our beautiful kingdom with visitors, but not at the expense of what makes it special in the first place. Working with the Council of Elders, William had established strict environmental protections for the most sensitive areas while creating carefully planned tourist facilities in locations that could accommodate visitors without disrupting local communities. The result was a tourism industry that brought prosperity to Valdorian families while preserving the pristine beauty that attracted visitors in the first place. But tourism was just one of the many positive changes that had occurred since William's coronation. The international attention had also brought investment opportunities, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic relationships that were transforming Valdoria's future prospects. 3 major universities from different countries had established partnership programs with Valdorian schools, providing scholarships for students and bringing international professors to teach in the kingdom. The small University of Sancta Maria had become a destination for students interested in environmental science, sustainable development, and cultural preservation. William took particular pride in the education initiatives he had helped establish. Drawing on his background as a librarian, he understood the importance of knowledge and learning in improving people's lives. Every village in Valdoria now had access to high-speed internet and digital libraries, connecting even the most remote communities to educational resources from around the world. Education is the foundation of everything else we want to achieve, William often said. If our children have access to excellent learning opportunities, they'll be able to solve problems we can't even imagine today. The healthcare system had also seen dramatic improvements. Several international medical organizations had volunteered to help upgrade Valdorian hospitals and clinics, and a medical school partnership had been established to train local doctors and nurses. The life expectancy in Valdoria was now among the highest in Europe, and infant mortality had dropped to nearly zero. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the world viewed small nations and their potential for positive leadership. William's example had inspired other small countries to focus on sustainable development, environmental protection, and citizen welfare rather than competing with larger nations through military or economic aggression. The Kingdom of Valdoria has shown that influence comes not from size or power, but from moral leadership and genuine care for people's welfare, wrote one international journalist. King William has redefined what it means to be a successful nation in the modern world. William's daily routine had evolved significantly since his early days as king. His mornings typically began with a briefing from his private secretary about the day's schedule and any urgent matters requiring his attention. Then came meetings with various ministers and advisors to discuss ongoing projects and policies. But William had insisted on maintaining direct contact with ordinary citizens. Every Wednesday afternoon was reserved for public audiences, where any Valdorian could request a personal meeting with their king. These sessions often ran long because William genuinely enjoyed listening to people's stories and concerns. "Your Majesty," said Maria Fernandez, a young mother from one of the mountain villages, during a recent audience, "I just wanted to thank you for the new medical clinic in our area. When my baby got sick last month, we didn't have to drive 2 hours to the city for help. The doctor was right there in our village." These conversations reminded William daily why he had accepted the crown. Every improved service, every new opportunity, every problem solved meant real improvements in the lives of people he had come to love as his extended family. Rose had adapted to palace life with remarkable grace for someone her age. At 88, she had become something of a beloved figure in her own right. known for her afternoon tea parties where she entertained the wives of diplomats, and visiting dignitaries with stories about raising a future king without knowing it. "I keep telling people that William was always special," Rose would say with a twinkle in her eye. "I just thought his specialty would be organizing library books, not organizing a kingdom." The relationship between William and Rose had deepened during their time in Valdoria. The shared experience of adapting to royal life had brought them even closer together, and William made sure to have dinner with Rose at least 3 times a week, no matter how busy his schedule became. "She's my anchor," William confided to Elena one day. "When everything feels overwhelming, talking with Rose reminds me who I am underneath all the royal responsibilities." One of William's most successful initiatives had been the establishment of the Valdorian Cultural Heritage Foundation, which worked to preserve and promote the kingdom's unique traditions while sharing them with the world. Traditional Valdorian music, crafts, and cuisine were becoming internationally recognized, providing income for local artisans and farmers while keeping ancient traditions alive. The foundation had also created exchange programs with other small nations, allowing young Valdorians to learn about different cultures while sharing their own traditions with others. These programs had created a network of friendships and partnerships that strengthened Valdoria's place in the international community. "Culture is our greatest treasure," William said at the Foundation's first annual celebration. "It's what makes us uniquely Valdorian, and sharing it with others doesn't diminish it. It makes it stronger and more meaningful." The environmental protection programs William had championed were becoming models for other countries. Valdoria had achieved carbon neutrality within 6 months of his coronation, and the kingdom was actually removing more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere than it produced. The mountain forests were expanding, the lakes were cleaner than they had been in decades, and wildlife populations were flourishing. International environmental organizations regularly sent delegations to study Valdoria's approach to balancing economic development with ecological protection. William took personal pride in these visits, often leading tours himself to explain how environmental stewardship was integrated into every aspect of government planning. "We don't see the environment as separate from the economy," William would explain. "A healthy environment is the foundation of a healthy economy. Clean air and water, beautiful landscapes, and thriving wildlife are not luxuries. They're necessities for long-term prosperity." As the first anniversary of his coronation approached, William reflected on how much had changed in just 12 months. The nervous librarian who had reluctantly accepted a crown he never expected had become a confident leader who genuinely loved his role and his people. The international media continued to follow William's story with fascination. Magazine articles called him the people's king and the monarch who cries. Documentary filmmakers wanted to create movies about his transformation from librarian to king. Publishers offered huge sums for the rights to his autobiography. But William politely declined most of these opportunities, preferring to focus on governing rather than celebrating his own story. When he did give interviews, it was usually to promote Valdoria's cultural programs or environmental initiatives rather than to discuss his personal life. "I'm not interested in being a celebrity king," he told one persistent journalist. "I'm interested in being an effective king. The measure of my success isn't how many magazine covers I'm on. It's how well the people of Valdoria are living." One of the most touching developments had been the annual tradition that emerged around the anniversary of William's coronation. Citizens throughout Valdoria began organizing service days, where communities would work together on projects to improve their neighborhoods, cleaning parks, repairing elderly neighbors' homes, organizing cultural events for children. "They call it the King's Day tradition," Elena told William. "But it really started when people saw how you rolled up your sleeves to help flood victims in your first week as king. They want to follow your example of service." These community service days had spread beyond Valdoria's borders. The viral videos of William helping with flood cleanup had inspired similar service movements in other countries, creating what some sociologists called the William effect, a global trend toward leaders and citizens working together to solve local problems. On the evening before the first anniversary of his coronation, William and Rose sat in their favorite spot overlooking the palace gardens. The gardens were now illuminated with soft lights that reflected in the lake below, creating a magical atmosphere that never failed to take William's breath away. "Do you ever regret leaving Millbrook?" William asked Rose, a question that had been on his mind lately. Rose considered the question carefully before answering. "I loved our quiet life there, and I'll always treasure those memories. But watching you grow into the leader you've become, seeing how much good you're able to do for so many people, and experiencing the love and respect of the Valdorian people. How could I regret being part of something so wonderful? Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had said no, William admitted. What if I had been too scared to leave our comfortable life? But you didn't say no, Rose pointed out gently. When the moment came to choose between comfort and duty, you chose duty. That tells me everything I need to know about the man you've always been, even when you didn't know it yourself. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city twinkle below them, William thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared young man who had trembled at the thought of becoming a king had discovered that leadership wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about caring deeply about others and being willing to work hard on their behalf. Tomorrow, there would be another anniversary celebration, with dignitaries from around the world coming to honor the remarkable transformation of both a man and a kingdom. But tonight, William was content to sit quietly with Rose, grateful for the unexpected path that had led him from a small library in England to a throne in the mountains of Valdoria. The coronation surprise that had brought the world to tears had become something even more beautiful, a lasting example of what could happen when someone chose service over safety, love over fear, and duty over comfort. King William of Valdoria had not only found his destiny, he had shown others that destiny often comes disguised as the very thing we think we're too ordinary to achieve. The librarian had become a king, the kingdom had found its heart again, and the world had discovered that sometimes the most extraordinary leaders come from the most ordinary beginnings. And, through it all, the tears that had first marked William's coronation had been replaced by smiles. Millions of smiles from people around the world who had been inspired by one man's willingness to answer when duty called, even when he didn't feel ready to respond.